Well, I essentially look at 15 of those that deal with data security, and essentially I map out where the greatest weaknesses are, or where you're the most immature. So it allows me to prioritize your risk in your risk assessment.
Are you ready to uncover the secrets of cybersecurity and protect your business? In this episode of Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge, we dive into the world of cybersecurity, discover how to navigate the evolving threat landscape, the power of behavioral strategies to prevent attacks, and critical steps to align your security measures with your business goals. Learn from real-life incidents like the MGM ransomware hack and find out how to avoid common pitfalls. Don't miss out on these game-changing insights. Your business's safety could depend on it. Today, my guest is Brent Neal. Welcome to the show, Brent.
Well, Mike, thanks for having me. It's exciting to be here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. I'm really looking forward to a good cybersecurity discussion with you. So, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about your background, where you come
Yeah.
from?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Brent Neal, and I am the vCISO and Principal Advisor for Vanguard Technology Group. And essentially what I do for a living is I help companies stay compliant and secure. And what that means at the end of the day is, I offer services that are known as a fractional CISO or a Chief Information Security Officer, also known as a virtual CISO or vCISO. And so we offer the leadership of behind vCISOs, as well as strategic planning, helping companies, build their and mature their security and privacy programs, help them with, through audits and prepare for audits, and align with all the various compliance regulations that are out there for cybersecurity and, of course, privacy. And so I guess my whole career many, many years ago started as a CEO and CIO of an IT firm and security firm that took care of clients worldwide. And we had a pretty good group of clients for a very long time. I did that for almost 17 years. It was a great fun experience doing that and taking care of the IT for these companies and these clients who had really become more partners with me than they were clients. And so it was a lot of fun, helping them build their businesses and interacting with them on a daily basis, and really watching their businesses flourish as my company really provided the IT and the internal. We acted more as the internal IT department, which is slightly different than your traditional MSP model. And so, and behind a lot of that, these companies were in everything, all kinds of regulatory compliance fields, from healthcare, finance, pretty much everything under the sun. And because of that, I had to build a lot of security programs, well over 100 security programs I had to build in a short time to deal with all these various compliance regulations that are out there, from PCI to HIPAA, and of course, companies accomplishing and gain their SOC 2 compliance and ISO and so forth. And so that's essentially where I began many, many years ago, almost 25 years ago now.
Wow, that's amazing. It's funny because I actually did a gig years back at a mortgage company, and a friend of mine and I went into the same place with the same contract, doing the same work on the same team, and he was a lot less experienced, and he would say, can you believe this? I had to change a sentence. I took a word out of a sentence, literally didn't change anything else, and they had to QA the entire website. I said, yeah, of course they do. You're dealing with people's
Yeah,
money, man. They don't want even the tiniest little thing to create a security problem for them later.
that's right.
Um, so you've had 2 decades in the field. How
Yeah.
how have you seen the cybersecurity landscape evolve?
Oh, it's evolved majorly. Back in the old days, it seemed like, I said earlier I was a CEO, CIO, right? And
Right.
so, back in the old days, security was really a part of IT. And in fact, it was almost more of, security was your managed switch and a firewall. It was pretty much, that's what
Pretty
security
much.
meant. And of course, that progression of things over time, because of all these different compliance regulations that come in, that were adopted through various regulations or just various standards that became more of the way of life, things radically changed. And today there are almost 40 what I would call domains of security today. Things like, now there's vulnerability management, incident response, business continuity, and disaster recovery, and configuration management. There's all these, individual security domains that now have to be taken care of. And so it's really radically changed from being just a few technologies to being more of a, robust program that has to be managed and governed overall.
Yeah, I know. I totally agree. I mean, coming through around the same time as you, um, I remember like taking over roles at companies and being like, "Where's your firewall?" And I'm like, "Firewall? What's that?" It was always really interesting. So, like, if you could take a piece of modern cybersecurity technology and put it back in time to when you first started your career,
Mhm.
so it didn't exist then, it exists now. What would it be and why?
I think there's a couple things that I think are great for, what they are and what they do today. Of course, when you look back at in the late 90s and especially early 2000s, everything all of a sudden the malware comes out and really pretty much starts devastating computers, and everything was very virus definition based. Today, the modern endpoint detection response is more behavioral in nature. I love to have seen that picked up and moved in the past and placed down, because I think that it does a wonderful job of understanding the behavior of how a PDF should act. If I'm opening it and it goes out and runs some PowerShell script, that's inappropriate. It's not what it should be doing. And so if you look at technologies like that that really have revolutionized the industry and really locked down and give you some great insights about what has happened on the machine, that's a type of technology to me that would be wonderful to have way back then, kind of thing. That's what my
Yeah.
son always says, back then.
Yeah, it's funny because behavioral strategies have always been something that I've noted at the forefront, but
Yeah.
not it seems like today people are more aware of potential hacks and phishing attempts and
Mhm.
whatnot. I can remember as a CTO sending out like a monthly email, and in every email there was the same blurb about if you don't know the where the link goes, don't click the link. And it seems so basic, but people were just click, 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 and it was like this shiny object
They
syndrome. The
still do that
internet was
today.
this, yeah, it's quite the opposite. If you track, like if you send links in an email and you track it, vast majority of people will not click it. Unless they know who you are, they will not click the link. And even then they're hesitant. I get a kick out of some of the stuff that comes out though, like
Yes.
you look at people will post online like, is this a scam? And you look at
Mhm.
the email address and it's supposedly from Microsoft, and you read and it's like, what domain is that? And you ask them, do you think Microsoft would use like, some strange domain name to send you such an important
Right.
email? Well, no. Well, then you think you've answered your own
Uh,
question.
I saw
So since go ahead.
I saw a very funny one the other day. You know how many years ago, when all that first started coming out, and the whole Ethiopian prince would give you
Uh-huh.
money. I actually saw one of those come through again. We're talking about almost 20 years ago. And so I
Yeah,
actually
recently,
saw,
right?
yeah, something recently
Yeah.
doing that same scam again. I thought that was really humorous. It's got a cyclical nature of everything in business and technology.
One, it's funny because you'd think that I understand why people fell for it back then. Internet was a
Yeah,
new thing.
right.
They weren't exposed to a lot of this stuff. I mean, when you think
Mhm.
about it, back then we lived in kind of a compartmentalized world.
Yes.
We were within our city, and unless we were a traveler, that was pretty much what we knew. And then all of a sudden, this guy sending you an email saying he'll get you millions of dollars. All you got to do is help him, and people fall for it. But
Mhm.
today, you would think nobody would fall for it, and yet
Right.
they wouldn't. I always tell my wife, these people wouldn't spend their time and effort if they weren't
Mhm.
succeeding at what they were doing, at least to some extent. So
Mhm.
people are still falling for it, right? So that kind of brings me to this question. So imagine that cybersecurity strategies are ingredients in a recipe.
Mhm.
What would be your secret ingredient that
Uh,
makes your cybersecurity strategy uniquely effective?
yeah. So I go about a few different things. So a lot of times when I come into a new client, there's always that situation whether they've already done a risk assessment, right? And so, really what I want to know at the end of the day is what risks that they've done. Well, my secret sauce, or one of the things that I do that's different, is essentially I perform a data security gap assessment, because at the end of the day, there's a couple things that I want to protect, which is, one, the platform. I want to prioritize the platform that makes the money, because a lot of what I do is with tech companies, especially SaaS software developers that are developing a SaaS software solution, and so I work a lot with those tech companies, and so that's the holy grail for them. That's their application where they make, and that's where they generate revenue. That's where they make money. So a lot of what you're trying to do is protect that environment. Well, as part of that, a lot of these SaaS providers have data that falls into regulatory compliance fields, whether that's, HIPAA or PCI because they're an e-commerce site or whatever it may be. They've now got regulated data. Okay. And so we have to not only protect the platform that makes us money, but we also have to protect the data that's in the background. So one of my methodologies that I do is I perform a data security posture gap assessment. And what that allows me to do is, remember how I mentioned about those domains that make up security. Well, I essentially look at 15 of those that deal with data security, and essentially I map out where the greatest weaknesses are, where you're the most immature. So it allows me to prioritize your risk in your risk assessment. And of course, if you haven't done a risk assessment, of course, we're going to implement that as well. But that allows me to really prioritize and give a quantitative approach to the risks you have, because a lot of companies, they perform all these various risk assessments, whether it's CIS or common controls or whatever, all these different types of assessments. And at the end of the day, they end up with this large list of things that they need to do to, drive things to, they don't know where to prioritize. And so that's where you prioritize, a couple different areas. That's that platform that makes you money, and then the data. And so what this allows us to do from all of these risks is understand where our biggest gaps are, and really where to focus our priorities in our action and our initiatives. And the key behind that is to drive action and behind all those remediation strategies that we need to implement.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's like a differentiator for you because
Yes.
I think a lot of people follow kind of a cookie cutter approach. First do this,
We
then do this, then
do.
do this.
We
And
do.
so having a way that's a little different is probably also way more effective in the
Yes.
long run, I would think. And it's going to give clients a little more secure feeling, not to use the word secure too
I've
much,
been
but
on both sides of this. I've been on the provider side, as a vCISO, and I've also been on the opposite side working for companies as their director of security or their CISO. And so, everybody wants to come in and assess you with different types of, risk assessments. But at the end of the day, I'm going to have a lot of knowledge over time of all my different risks. I'm going to have a lot of information from all the different sources of vulnerability scanning that I do. And I have to know where to prioritize and what to prioritize. And that's why I do what I do, so to speak, is to, get an idea of how to prioritize what's the most effective of really driving their risks down.
perfect. Could you share some of the challenges that you faced in aligning cybersecurity strategies with overall business objectives, and how did you
Yeah.
overcome them?
Yeah. So a lot of the key here is that, from my point of view, is that we have to align the business with the technology of what, they're using, with the security and with all of the compliance regulations that are out there, and privacy concerns and so on. We have to align that. And so we have to go through a very methodical process of asking questions and determining what compliance regulations affect that specific business. Okay. Once I figure that out, or once we determine, what those things are, now it becomes, having discussions about, what their business objectives are, so that we align all of the strategies and actions that we need to put in place that it aligns with where they're trying to drive the business. Okay. So one of those things a lot of times ends up being that, and a lot of times they even are hiring me because they want to become compliant with SOC 2 or ISO or HIPAA. And so I know right up front, a lot of times that's the primary driver, business driver behind what they're trying to accomplish. So now at that level, it's now putting in, driving everything that we do, every action to become, SOC 2 compliant, and be able to, overcome, pass our audit, I guess is the right way to say it. And so if we can, put in all the right components to pass that audit, number one, we're overcoming one of the first challenges, in the business. Okay. So then a lot of times what ends up, I see a lot, is with vulnerability management. A lot of companies, especially development companies, are, and I get this, the product groups, the sales groups are pushing features because, the whole key is that they're selling a product. This really
Right.
probably falls into your realm, Mike. And so, the whole piece of this is that they want to sell a product, and I get that and understand that because, security at the end of the day, our job is to align with business requirements. We have to support the business in making money. We can't keep the business from making money. But if the product has vulnerabilities, if it has, problems that aren't working, we actually need to, stop what we're doing and reconsider, the push for features, predominantly because this is also a compliant, regulatory compliance issue. It involves exposure of data, all these different pieces that now create it more of a business concern. And so that ends up being the discussion or the challenge a lot of times is product groups that are very focused on features and have been negligent about doing any kind of vulnerability remediation. It's trying to change the mindset and the culture of the company to be security first. And that takes a little bit of time of trying to put in place the things that switch around a culture to start thinking differently than it did before. And a lot of times what I do with that is, you start building the relationships. You start working with product managers early on to tell you the story of what kinds of things that they're working on, so that they're getting the projects implemented, with security early on in the process. And you start coaching and building those things so that they now count on you to provide advice. And with me, a lot of times is not. I'm a little bit different from a security perspective as a leader, that it's not no first. I hear that a lot, as security is always the no first agency, no first department. And so, at the end of the day, we're all there to make the business money. It can't be a no first. We need to discuss what we're trying to do and what things we can put in place to overcome the obstacle.
That's funny. That seems to be an issue with a lot of tech related fields. Like when I used to lead software development teams, I can't tell you how many people would come to me after having a meeting with one of my sub teams and say, they told me this isn't possible, but like our competitor has this feature.
Yes.
And I'd ask them and they'd say, oh, do you know how much work that is? And then you'd have to have that conversation that like,
Yes.
I don't care how much work it is. It's what we're here to be paid for. You got to do the work and don't tell people no about, I mean, I always tried to be, if I didn't know the answer, going to research it. If I thought it wasn't possible, got to research it. I need to
Right.
give me some time to look into this and get back to you, because no one wants to say, can I do this? No, they don't want to
Mhm.
hear that. So that while you were talking about your approach there, it made me think of something. One thing that I think is probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, but probably important, is when they're trying to pass these audits, and you're implementing changes in order to make them pass those audits. How difficult is it to get them to understand that these are long-term things? We're not just doing this just to pass the audit. Like it's
Yeah.
something that has to stick.
And part of that goes back to culture, because one of the things that you see in some companies, especially the larger they get, is a lot of companies become very much about the compliance check mark. So they're only putting in a
Yeah.
control, or they're evaluating what's going on, and they're going, do you have a policy? Yes or no, check mark. And so it becomes very check mark driven, and not, it really comes down to creating that culture that thinks security first. The more that's ingrained into their being, it stops being a check mark, and it's more about, how do we do this the right way? That responsibility, especially with privacy today, it's the right thing to do attitude. So that's where a lot of it is getting over the hump of it being just a check mark, and understanding the ethical and the responsibility that a company has to protect the data and put the right things in place. It doesn't mean that, you got to think, like, let's say a company's only making, $10 million as a year as a SaaS provider, they're a startup. Well, it would be extremely expensive for them, and probably detrimental to them, to go out and spend $2 or $3 million, 20 to 30% of their budget on security controls. They just can't do that. So it becomes this balance of what are our highest risks, and what areas do we really, what's the appropriate controls or appropriate technologies to put in place, so that it's not overkill, and we're not, making security so cumbersome that, it's just in everything we do. It has to be a balance of the business with the risk, and with the things that we need to do that's appropriate for who we are and where we are and what industry we're in, and so on.
So my listeners know this, you might not, but I come at you from Las Vegas, and I've only lived here for 2 years, but in the time that I've lived here, one of the big events that occurred was the MGM
Yeah.
ransomware hack. You're familiar with that, right?
Yes. Mhm.
So what do you think they could have done better? Because obviously what happened was person comes, goes on LinkedIn, finds a higher up's name, they call in to the help desk, hey, I can't remember my password. Can you reset it for me?
Yeah.
And without actually validating anything, other
Yeah,
than the fact,
that's the
what
key.
is your
It
name?
is,
What department do you work in? Okay, great. Here, let
yeah.
me reset the password without validating anything. They reset his password. So
Mhm.
what could they have done better? Like what kind of policy should they have in place to
Uh,
keep that from happening again?
yeah, so there's a couple pieces there. There's policy, but there's also, the key aspect that a lot of these checkmark groups miss is that they don't look at it from, okay, is your process, the things that you're doing, the procedures, are they aligning with what you're saying? Are you doing what you're saying you're doing? And that ends up being a big gap because of that checkmark thought process that goes on of just meeting compliance. And so it really revolves around that cultural aspect of things like, security awareness training. Because I've seen the same problem. I had a client a very long time ago that had something similar. They were, a financial group, and there was basically HR got contacted, and the employee, somebody posing as an employee said, "Hey, I want to change my, banking information, and so that my direct deposit goes, to the right bank." Well, they didn't, do very much as a due diligence aspect to verify that, this was the right person. And that's the whole key. You kind of mentioned it, is that you have to go back. You either have to, go down through your Rolodex, concept, your contacts in Outlook, and look and go, okay, I have their phone number. Let's call them and verify that this is really what's going on. They did, ask, hey, send me a copy of your check. Well, what was really hilarious was that the check, somebody had altered using Photoshop or some, basic program, and you could, when you blew it up and looked at it, you could tell it wasn't even, somebody had added it in. So they didn't go through the methodical process. They weren't really trained of the importance of looking at all these, little things and doing all these extra effort items. And to me, that's where, you have to, do some sort of authentication back. And that's why MFA and so those sort of things occur, is there's an authentication step that goes back and verifies, is this really you? And that those are some of the gaps that you have to do with tech support departments, HR and finance groups, because money will go out the window because you didn't walk them through and train them on, the right things to do. And how to
Yeah.
respond to things like that. And because, security awareness training, everybody's doing it, right? And they use, products like Know Before that, have very systematic ways of training employees, which are great, but they haven't gone the extra mile. Companies have to go the extra mile and really develop training programs that are specific around different departments and what they deal with. So when, tech support is called, tech support has been gone through a specific training about how they interact and what they things that they need to do, or HR and finance. They've been taught all these things that are specific to their processes, to their way of life, their culture in those departments. That's what I see has been more effective at thwarting or keeping instances like MGM from occurring. And it's not necessarily just policy; it's really, implementing the right, procedures and processes that really overcome those obstacles.
I agree. I also think that maybe they need to take a line out of the script from retail companies and like kind of secret shop their help desk, call in and say, hey, my name's John Smith. I work in the whatever department and I can't remember my password. Can you change it for me? And
Yeah.
see what happens, because social engineering is, in my opinion, the biggest threat because
Mhm.
I mean, you look at how companies now that have sensitive data, they have a hidden pin in your profile that when you
Yeah.
contact support, they'll say, "Hey, this." My web hosting company, Liquid Web, if I send them an email to support at
Yeah.
Liquid Web, they respond back and say, "Please go into the portal and authenticate
Mhm.
your contact with us,"
Yes.
even though it came from the right email address with the right IP address. I mean, it's coming from their server,
Uh-huh.
etc. They know that people are capable of spoofing that,
That
and
is
so they so
correct.
they check it. So I think that's one really
Mhm.
big thing. But I mean, like you mentioned, a check, and I think that's why the more you can obscure the data down to a point where it's a need to know basis, the safer you are. And the example I can give you is I was a CTO for years for a restaurant delivery service, and what their whole process was they would sign a restaurant, they would charge the restaurant a commission for selling the food. So if they sold food for $100, we'd get 30, they'd get 70. And They would then every 2 weeks, they would send the restaurant a check for the food that their customers had purchased. And I can't tell you how many instances we dealt with of some shady manager got the check and before he deposited it, made a photocopy, then was printing checks on our account and writing checks, right? To the point where our poor accounting department, we put out thousands of checks a month. And they would have to, Bank of America would make them go in and put in the check number, who it was written to, and the amount in a little portal, or they wouldn't clear the check. Well, this is why I think today, where we send things by electronic transfer, it's so much more secure because they don't get my account number. They
Yeah.
didn't even really, they'll know what bank it came from. But they don't know much more than that.
Mhm.
And it's so much safer than sending a check. And I also think it's why checks are kind of becoming a dying thing. I'm always shocked when a customer will tell me when they're paying an invoice, where do I send the check? I'll say, the what? We're in
We're still using
2024, man. It's kind of sad that like you would think a big place like MGM, you know, I mean, we can talk about their how they handled it with the customer, tried to hide things. I mean, it was very interesting here in Vegas because the locals all knew it was going on because it had happened maybe 2 months before to Caesar's Palace.
Mhm.
And even that shocks me because I would think, I don't know, if I was the CTO of MGM and I heard the Caesars got ransomware hacked, I'd be
Yeah.
finding out a lot of info about how that happened. And then I'd be making damn sure it didn't happen at my company.
And it didn't blow up in my face. Just a few doors down the
Yeah.
street.
Well, it's like I always remember as a CTO, my job was always to drive the strategy, right?
Yes.
And I can remember years ago when online shopping was first becoming a thing, Toys R Us was like, we're gonna have for Black Friday, we're gonna have a website. You don't have to leave home, you just go there. Well, that website crashed and burned on
Uh-huh.
Black Friday because they had no idea at the time how many people were actually going to log on. Well, that poor CTO lost his job over that. And I took that with me to every engagement I had. Make sure you check the scalability of this website. Make sure it can handle the traffic we expect it to get plus like 50%. You learn from other people's boo-boos, right? When they make a
Do.
mistake, you learn from it,
And
right?
that's key. So that's why, like, when I go into a company, and one of the things when we're dealing with incident response and DR and BR, one of the key things that I do is we perform a threat model. We have to understand what threats are specific to us. There's a whole list of things of, people out there telling you, hey, be cautious of this and that, but it may have no relevance to the company X at all because of what they do or how they how their technology works and so on. And so it's having real live real good discussions with the people who are in the know, whether it's DevOps groups or engineers and architectural groups and system admins. You're getting all these people together and we're talking through various scenarios of how would somebody take us down. Okay, all right, well, let's put a web application firewall in place. And now you're having further discussions. Okay, if it went down, do we have any recourse for that? What do we do? Do we have the right SLA in place with our particular vendor? You have to start asking the questions and posing questions that are sometimes difficult or sometimes people don't want to hear, but it allows us to walk through and really understand how especially from a security perspective, we don't always know the little hidden things of how the data is interacting. Like one of the things I do also is have them create a data flow diagram. It's required for audits, but a lot of people just kind of gloss over and put a very high level, and they don't get down to the nitty gritty. For me to know as a security expert that, oh, guess what? We've got certain set of information exiting the building and going out to something like Plan Hat or HubSpot or one of these other third party providers, and now our weakest link isn't even us. It's them. And so it's understanding really what's going on, and you don't always uncover those unless you're going very methodically through a threat modeling situation, an exercise, and having them detail out how things work, so that you can help plan and create, even from an incident response perspective. Now you're creating specific IR run books for those specific threats. Now your people know how to respond specifically to that type of event that would occur.
When sometimes, I mean, I always say the person who knows just enough is the most dangerous
Yeah.
to the whole entire situation. I remember, when I was a CTO for that restaurant delivery service, our CEO really believed in us having our weekends. And so he would rarely call me on a weekend unless there was a real big emergency. And one particular time I get this phone call and we had a new sales director, and apparently he had had like a training with her that Saturday morning. And she expressed as a concern that her team could, if they were quitting, could download a customer list,
Yeah.
attach it to an email, and send it. So he told me, well, she's got a solution though. All you got to do is you got to change our Outlook template to not allow attachments. And I chuckled and I said, can we talk about this on Monday morning in your office? And he said, sure. I said, well, because I need to show you something. And so I go to his office and I said, so what are we trying to protect here? And he goes, here, watch this. And he downloads from our software. He opens a spreadsheet. Look, it's got their name. It's got their phone number. It's got their email address. It's got their fax number, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's even got their order history. Then they're going to attach this to an email and send it out. But if you change the template like this, look, it won't let me attach it. I said, you're right, it won't. But watch this. Highlight, Control A, Control C, go to the email, Control V, send.
Mhm.
Look, it went. How did that happen? It's not an attachment. It doesn't
Mhm.
have to be an attachment. And
Right.
that's the problem. Myopically looking at a
Oh.
situation and going, oh, that's the with a capital T solution. And I don't believe there's any the solution. I
Mhm.
think there are solutions, plural, and you almost have to layer them. I mean,
Yeah.
why do you, I give you an example. I work for some big companies doing NetSuite development,
Mhm.
and they use for their source control they use things like Bitbucket, GitHub, etc. And the problem that I see with those is that if a hacker wants to get in there, they're going to get in there, they're going to browse directories, and they're going to steal your source code. When I was controlling development, I put that source control server inside my network behind a firewall, subnetted off to a different place where only my team knew about it. It had access control list control. It had all sorts of layers of security. And I was just running a software that ran our call center. It wasn't like if
Mhm.
someone stole the software, good luck to you figuring out what it does. I mean, have
Yeah.
fun. But like LastPass,
Mhm.
security company, their source code got stolen and their database got stolen. Like,
Mhm.
how? It makes you really, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Uncomfortable knowing that this is supposed to be a company that's thinking about security
Because they are a
and they got
security company.
taken that badly.
It happens.
Well, sure. And it's like we were talking about before, the CTO of MGM being kind of remiss and not
Yeah.
going, oh, look, Caesars got hacked. I better make sure it doesn't happen to me. People People are really the weakness. That's really what I feel like it comes down to. So this has been really an interesting conversation. I'd
Yeah.
love it if you could do two things for me.
Yeah.
Tell my audience how they could engage with you if they want to, because I think this is a really important topic.
Yes.
And the second thing is how they can connect with you.
Yeah, so there's a couple things there. So first of all, you can go to vanguardtechnologygroup.com. That is our website, and you can engage us from there, and of course fill out forms and call us, that type of thing as well. Also with me personally, I am on LinkedIn, and so basically just look up Brent Neal in LinkedIn, and you'll find me. And I do post content almost daily about various security situations. I do live events and so on to help educate people on all these crazy security things, and even sometimes funny stories. Asking the question, "Is this you?" And so yes, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and or you can just go to vanguardtechnologygroup.com.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I've truly appreciated the conversation. It's been a fun
Yeah, it's been
time.
great.
It feels like we come from a similar
Yeah.
time frame in technology too. So that always makes the conversation even more interesting. So, but thanks again for your time here. And everybody, thank you so much for being here at Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge. New episodes every Wednesday. They stream live on LinkedIn and Facebook, and then they're released on YouTube. Hope you come back next week. And until then, have a great week.